Masechet Baba Mesia Daftet Zayin. We begin with an interesting question. Be'amine Shemuel Merav Hazar Ulkacha mi Be'alim Arishonim Mahu. We're starting with the same case that Rav and Shemuel themselves were arguing about on the previous daf. And this says a thief steals a piece of land from an owner, and then the thief sells it to an unknowing buyer for $1 million. Now here's the twist. The thief goes and then purchases that very land legally from the owner, right? He comes to the owner, listen, I stole your land, but now I want to make good. Here's $1 million, and the owner agrees to that. What do we do with that? The question is, should we assume that the thief bought it for himself, and therefore the original sale to the buyer was null and void because he didn't own it at that point, and therefore the thief can come to the buyer, take the land back, because now it's the thief's own, just like the original owner could repossess it. The thief himself can repossess the land from the buyer, and then the buyer will sue the thief for the purchase price. That's option A. Or should we assume that the thief sold the land to the buyer and he really meant to sell it, except that one problem, he didn't own it himself to sell it, but now he's making good on that, and he goes and he buys it from the owner, having in mind that now it will legitimately and fully be go to the buyer and be his. He wants to make good on the sale that he had made before. Maybe even when he made the sale, he's like, I don't own it quite yet, but I'll own it soon, right? I'll sell you a condo now, even though it's not built. I don't even own the land yet, but I'm about to. So, and I'm pretty sure that I can buy it. So he sells something that isn't his, but then makes good on it. So should we assume that he's buying the land on behalf of the buyer? That's Shemuel's question to Rav, and we have an answer. Amale, ma macha lo rishon lasheni, kol zechut shetavo liyado. What did the thief sell to the buyer in the first place? He sold to him any rights that will come into his possession. So the thief, although at the time of the sale, the thief has no rights to it because he only stole it, but the idea is that I'm selling to you any rights that I even will have. And so should tomorrow, one day, I get this land legitimately, then that will pass over to the buyer even from now. And therefore, yes, we can assume that the thief is buying it on behalf of the buyer, and now the buyer can keep it, and the thief cannot take it back for himself anymore. Good. Mai ta'amah. What is the reason? Why would a robber do this? Mor zutra amar nichale de la nikriye gazlana. Rav Asher amar nichale de leku behemanute. Two reasons. They're very similar. Mor zutra says that the robber does not want to be called a robber by the buyer, because eventually it's going to be found out. The owner's going to come and repossess, and then the buyer's going to be going to say, "You thief! You sold me stolen land. I gave you $1 million. You stole that $1 million." And so he doesn't want to be called a thief by the buyer, and so he's going to arrange it to make it good. Whereas Rav Asher says, more generally, that the robber wants to have a good reputation. He wants to be known as reliable. So this has less to do with the buyer himself and about being called a robber by the buyer specifically. This is more about his general reliability among people, that the next time he goes and sells something, people won't say, wait, didn't you sell something that wasn't yours last time? So he'll be believed. My benayu. What would be a practical distinction between Mozutra and Rav Asher? We're going to offer three answers. Ika benayu demit lokeach. Manda manichale de la likriye gazlana ha mitle. A difference would be if the buyer dies. According to the first opinion of Mozutra, that he doesn't want to be called a thief by the buyer. Well, the buyer is dead now, so it doesn't really matter what he thinks. But according to the opinion that says he wants to have his reputation as a reliable person, then the sons also of the deceased buyer and other people too, he wants them to know that he is a reliable person. And so according to the first, if he had bought the land after the buyer died, we can assume he bought the land only for himself, not to make good on the deal, because he doesn't care about what the buyer thinks if the buyer is dead. Whereas, according to the second, even if if the buyer had died, he still cares about his general reputation, and including that of the children themselves. Okay, sof sof karule bene lokeach gazlana. But we reject this because in the end, even the sons of the lokeach will call him a robber, because eventually the land will be repossessed, either by the original owner or maybe by the robber if the robber buys it for himself, and then the sons will call him a robber, and he's gonna, not just like he didn't want the buyer to call him a robber, that he wouldn't want the sons of the buyer to call him a robber either, and so therefore that would not be a difference. Ela ika benau demit gazlan. Oh, how about a case where the thief himself dies? Manda, and then the sons are the ones that go and buy it from the original owner. Now, should we assume that the sons are buying it for themselves or on behalf of the buyer? According to the opinion that a person does not want to be called a robber, well, the robber died, so he's not going to be called anything, so who cares? But if it's about the general reputation of reliability, so even though the robber died, still he wants to have a good reputation even after he dies, and so he would want the land to go to the buyer, and therefore whether he before he died or the sons buy the land at some point, we can assume it does go to the buyer. But we reject this too. Sof sof karu libne bene gazlana. Okay, even if the thief himself is dead, if the sons go and take it for themselves, then they're going to be called robbers. And just like a person doesn't want to be called robbers, he doesn't want his sons to be called robbers, and so we can assume that he or his sons, if they bought the land, they would want to buy it on behalf of the buyer to make good and to not be called a family of robbers. Ela, the third and last answer, Ika benayu diahava bematana. We're talking about a case, the difference between the two opinions would apply in a case where the thief gave it to the recipient, instead of the buyer, we'll call him a recipient, gave it to him as a gift. The second opinion that says a person cares about his reputation to be a reliable person, that would apply to a gift also, because if he gives a gift and then it's repossessed, everybody will say, that guy's gifts, they get repossessed. He's not a reliable person. Even if you get a gift from him, you never know if you're going to be able to keep it. So then we assume he would buy it on behalf of the recipient, so that it will be a legitimate gift. But according to the first opinion that said that the robber does not want to be called a robber, well, in this case, he gave it as a gift, so he's not robbing anybody. He robbed the original owner, but he's not robbing the recipient. If he gives the recipient a gift, and then the gift gets taken away, so you can't call him a robber. You can call him not reliable as a gift giver, but he's not a robber. You don't have any. There's no loss to the recipient. The recipient had this thing for a few days, and now it's taken away, so he wouldn't be called robber in any case. And so, therefore, according to that opinion, in a case where someone gave a gift and then that someone who was a thief, the thief is the gift giver, went and then bought it legitimately, we can assume that he bought it for himself, because he's not going to be called a robber anyway. But if it's about his reputation of being reliable, then we can assume that he bought it on behalf of the gift recipient. Good. That's all one case. Now, Pishita, Zabena, Orta v'yahava b'matana. Lav le'ukme kameh lokeach kaba'eh. Same case as before, but we're adding one more piece to it. A thief stole land from the owner, and he sold it to a buyer. Then the thief goes and buys the land legitimately from the owner, and here's the one more step. Then he goes and sells it to a different person. Right, he sold it to buyer A originally when he didn't own it, but now that he bought it legitimately, he sells it to buyer B. The fact that he sells it to buyer B shows that when he bought it from the owner, he did not intend to make good on his first sale. Rather, he's buying it for himself to sell it to buyer B, and therefore buyer B keeps it, and buyer A has to sue and get his money back. Same thing if he bequeathed this to someone or he gave it as a gift. Again, the thief stole it, sold it to a buyer, then bought it legitimately, and gave it away to an heir or as a gift. The fact that he gave it away shows that he did not buy it on behalf of the buyer, but rather to give it away, and therefore the thief can go repossess the land from the first buyer that he sold it to and give it to the recipient, and then that first buyer has to come and sue him for the sale price. Nafla le birusha, Yerusha memelahi v'lav ihu katarach abatraha. Now what about the following case? Again, the thief stole land and sold it to a buyer. And then, turns out the original owner, died and left it to the thief in his will. Wow, strange. Okay, but that could happen. You could have a son that steals something from a father. They don't get along very well, whatever. And then that son sells it to someone. The father dies, leaves it as inheritance to the thief. In that case, because the thief just got it passively, he didn't do anything to get it, therefore we cannot assume that he's trying to make good on the original sale, and therefore the thief now has it legitimately, and he can be, like the original owner could, repossess the land from the buyer, and the buyer will sue this thief for his money back. Gabeihu bechovo. Interesting case. The thief repossesses the land from the original owner to pay for a loan, an outstanding loan. In other words, you have an owner of land and you have a thief who steals that land, but it turns out that that owner also owes for a loan, for a previous loan, $1 million to the thief, or a later loan, whatever. He owes $1 million to the thief, and he defaults on the loan. The thief comes and says, hey, you have to give me land instead of the loan. And he says, okay, that land, right, the one that you stole in the first place. Says, okay, he takes that land that he stole in the first place. So in that case, we assume that when the thief, collects now legitimately that land from the owner, is that collection on behalf of the buyer and the buyer keeps it, or on behalf of himself, and he can go take it back from the buyer. So it depends. Chazina. If the original owner has lots of different lands, but the thief says, I want that one, the same one that I stole, I want now to be able to keep it legitimately, then why did he pick that one? It must be because he wanted to establish it in the hands of the buyer to validate that original sale, and then the buyer can keep the land. But if the original owner has no other land, there's no choices, then we say the robber was also out $1 million for a loan. And so in that case, we assume that he is taking that land because he has no choice for another land. So he's taking that land in order to be repaid his debt. But that's his interest, to repay his debt, and he wants to keep the land. So therefore, the thief can go to the buyer, repossess the land, and the buyer then has to sue for his money back. What if the owner gives a gift of the land to the thief? Right, the thief first stole it, and then the owner says, you know what, just keep it as a gift. Maybe unusual, but I guess it could happen. Let's say, two partners or good friends or brothers, and one is acts as a lowlife and steals it, but in the end he says, oh, I'm really down and out, please have mercy on me, and I can't pay you back, can you forgive it and just give it as a gift? And because they go back a long way, or maybe they're brothers, so he says okay, right, and he has mercy on him. So let's say a case like that, when now it's given as a gift. Can we assume that he takes it as a gift on behalf of the buyer to make good on his deal, or takes it for himself? There's two opinions. One says that a gift is the same as an inheritance. He doesn't do anything, it's passive. The thief is just sitting there, and the original owner says, you know what, you probably stole it because you were under pressure in a bad way, and I'm just going to give it as a gift. I'm feeling very generous. So since it's only passive, then we cannot assume that the thief got it as a present on behalf of the buyer. It's same as getting an inheritance, right? The guy just died, and then the thief gets it, so he has no intention about it. But the other opinion says, matana kemecher, di lav de tarach ve'arse kame, la have yahib le matana, lahachi tarach ve'arse kame, ki hechi delekom behem anute. This opinion says we should compare a gift to a sale, because if not, that the thief had went and ingratiated himself to the owner, please give it to me as a gift, I can't pay you back, I'll be good from now on, I'll get back on my feet, I'll get a job. And if not that he went and ingratiated himself, the owner would not have given it to him as a gift. So why did he go and ask him so many times and ask him, please give it to me as a gift? We can assume that it's because he wanted to validate his sale that he had with the buyer so that he'll have a good reputation going forward, right? He wants to get back into honest business, and so that would be in his interest to do so. The next question is, until when can we assume the thief wants to make good on the sale? As three opinions for the ending point for this assumption. Amar Rav Huna, ad she'at hamada bedin. Rav Huna says it's until the time that the buyer takes the robber to trial. In other words, this whole time, right, the thief stole from the owner and he sells it to the buyer. Immediately, he could say, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. I want to make good. I want my reputation to be good. He has a long time to do this until the owner eventually comes and repossesses the land. And then the buyer says, oh, this was stolen. So the buyer recognizes it was stolen. And so what's going on? The thief could at that point say, no, I'm going to make good. Don't worry. But instead, he waits till the buyer goes to court and the trial already begins. That shows that the thief does not care about his reputation. And if he goes and buys it, from that point onwards, we assume that the thief wants to buy it for himself. Second opinion, this is even during the course of the trial, if he makes good on it and he goes and buys it, that if he goes and buys it, then we assume he wants to make good and he's buying it on the behalf of the buyer. But rather the ending point is later on, after the verdict, when the court says to the thief, you have to pay $1 million, and then the thief doesn't pay, and they issue a document of authorization to the buyer to go and possess the land of the thief, right? You have a right to collect. At that point, now the thief was already found guilty. Already, some land is going to be given up. Okay, now he goes to buy it from the owner. Now he's not doing it to make good. Now he wants that land, so he's going to go buy it, but he's buying it for himself. In which case, he pays the money to the owner, and he goes and repossesses the land himself. The thief gets it, or if the owner already repossessed it, the thief takes that land. And then the buyer has to go and deal with choosing a piece of land from the thief to get his money back. Rapapa, the third opinion, Amar, ad mathalan yome achrasta. Rapapa says even later, even if you get the authorization document, still, he has to go, it's still difficult to get the land back. It's not until the court actually comes, seizes the land of that thief, and puts it on the market. And now it's already going to be very publicized. You want to put it on the market to get the best price. And then the result of that sale, they'll use to pay off the buyer for what the buyer is suing. It's only until that point. As long as before that, the thief goes and buys it, we can assume that he's buying it to make good on the original sale and give the land to the buyer. But after that, now it's already public. Obviously, the thief doesn't care about his reputation much if he's allowing his name to be publicized all over town. That the court is auctioning off his land because he stole something. All right, next, matkif la Rami bar Chama. Mikdi hai lokech b'may kanile hai ar'a b'haishtara chaspa be'almahu. Okay, Rami bar Chama is going to challenge Rav's law. We were discussing Rav's law this whole time, that when the thief buys the land from the owner, we assume, in most of these cases, for most of the time, we assume that he's buying it on behalf of the buyer, and thereby the buyer keeps the land. But Rami bar Chama rejects it. And we're going to see as a bunch of Amoraim strongly on one side or the other side of this statement of Rav. And he says, this buyer, meaning the buyer who originally bought it from the thief, In what way does he make this transaction happen? With a shtar, right? When the thief originally stole that land and he sold it to the buyer thinking it was a legitimate sale, and presumably they wrote a deed of sale. So is it with that deed? That deed is just a shard of clay. It's not worth anything because the thief didn't own the land. So if I write you a deed for the Empire State Building that I don't own and sell it to you, so now is that deed worth anything? It's just a piece of paper. So now later on, when the thief goes to the owner and buys it for $1 million, so now automatically it goes to the buyer. By what method will the buyer acquire it? It can't be from that original deed that's worth nothing. Retroactively, how does that work? So Rami Bar Chama rejects Rav's rule. Amar le Rava. You have to remember, Rava and Rami Bar Chama were in always fierce competition in many matters of halacha. They were also in competition to marrying the daughter of Rav Chisda, and they actually both end up marrying her one after the other. So here they're in competition about this halacha too. Amar le Rava tehe ma b'ma'amino be'ahu hana'a de la kamar le midi v'kasamich ale tarachu maiti le gamar umakni le. There is in fact a transaction here, and the transaction is hana'a, the satisfaction that the thief gets by knowing that the buyer has trust, even after the original owner comes and says this was stolen land and all that. And the buyer says, you know what, thief, I trust you. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm not going to say anything to you. I know that you're going to make this right. So that giving the benefit of the doubt to the thief says, wow, that was so nice of him to do that he has faith in me. By that's something that he gets. So he's going to work and he's going to decide, you know what, I'm going to buy it. And when I buy it, I'll have in mind this is on behalf of the buyer. So there is actually a give and take here. And even that benefit, that satisfaction, is something that can be used in this acquisition. Also the fact that he knows and says, listen, I'm doing this on your behalf. I'm acquiring this on your behalf. So all this makes it, but yeah, you're right, not the original deed. Mativ Rav Sheshat. Rav Sheshat now challenges Rav's ruling, right? You see, Rav Sheshat and Rami Bar Chama are going to be on the same team against Rav and Rava. Ma she'ira irash me'aba machur lecha. Ma she'tale mesudati machur lecha lo amar kelum. This Braita teaches that if a person goes and says to someone else, what I will inherit from my father, right? My father, whenever he dies, I'm going to inherit $1 million. Whatever I inherit, I'm going to inherit this property here. So whatever I inherit, I want to sell to you from now. I want the money now, right? So pay me whatever price. Then when I inherit it, it'll be yours. Or a fisherman says he wants to sell the futures of his fishing expeditions, and he says, whatever I catch, I am selling to you from now, right? Whatever I catch for the next season, the next year, we make a price from now. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can't do anything because you can't sell something that isn't yours, right? You see that this is the same as our case. How can the thief sell something that isn't his, even if he ends up buying it later, right? This land, even if he says up front, this land that I will buy, I'm going to buy it next week. I'm going to sell it to you from now. There's no sale here because he doesn't own it. That's going to be the challenge. Now, it does continue with a sefa, which we'll have to explain as well. If he adds today, right, whatever I inherit from my father today, his father's on his deathbed, he's going to die very soon, so he can make a deal, whatever I inherit today, I am selling to you from now, and he could take the money. Or a fisherman in the morning says, whatever I'm going to catch today, I want to sell to you because he needs the money right now. That works. We'll see later why that works, but that's the exception. The rule is you cannot sell something that you don't own yet. So that's a big challenge. Amar Rami Bar Chama hagabra v'hati ubta. Rami Bar Chama says, look at this great man, Rav Sheshat, what a great Amorah this is, and look at his strong question, his complete refutation. of Rav. So that's it. Rami Bar Chama backs it up. So you see here, Rami Bar Chama also question number 4. And even though Rava told Rami Bar Chama an answer, evidently Rami Bar Chama did not accept it. Instead, he likes this proof from Rav Sheshat. However, Rava knows that Braita too. Amar Rava, Gavra kahazena tuyubta la kahazena. Rava says, I agree. There's a great man here, Rav Sheshat, the greatest of teachers. But I don't see a great question because I have an answer. Hacha samcha da'ate v'hacha la samcha da'ate. Hacha samcha da'ate da'azil v'tarach u'maytile. Ki hechi de la nikreye gazlana. Hacha la samcha da'ate. In one case, he deems the other guy reliable, in the other case not. In the case where he deems him reliable, that's our case of the buyer who bought something from the thief, and then it turns out, he finds out, oh, this was stolen property, but he says, I know this thief. He's an upstanding person, even though he just stole a field, but okay, whatever mix-up happened, I know that he's going to make good on it. And he's going to work because he doesn't want to be called a robber, right? We're not dealing with buying something from a known criminal, a mafia guy. I bought something from a respectable person in the community, and he's not going to be he will not want me to think of him as a robber, so I know he's going to make good. Since I know he's going to make good, and I'm relying on him, that's a hana'ah, right? And then, therefore, he can make an acquisition. The thief can make the acquisition on behalf of the buyer, and the buyer gives into it and gives him the benefit of the doubt. That's how the acquisition works. Whereas in the case of the fisherman or the person or the person inheriting, so the buyer does not rely. I don't know how much you're going to fish today, this year, if it's going to be a lot or little, or if the father's going to actually die and what he's going to inherit. And so that's why it doesn't work. He says nothing because the buyer did not really have faith that or trust that this will actually go through. So there's a world of a difference between that Braita. I agree with that Braita, but that's not the same as the case of a thief, where I know the thief will come through and make good on the sale. Shalachu lekamed Rabbi Abba bar Zavda. Amar lehu zo ena sricha lifnim. This statement of Rav Sheshat was sent to Rabbi Abba bar Zavda, the refutation, and he says we don't have to bring this into the Bet Midrash because it's right. Right, Rav Sheshat is right. He's so correct that we don't even have to put it on the agenda for discussion, because clearly Rav Sheshat is right and Rav is wrong. However, Amar Rava is continuing to defend Rav always. Zosricha lifnim velifnef lifnim. Hacha samcha da'ateh v'hacha la samcha da'ateh. Rava says not only do you have to bring Rav Sheshat's statement back into the Bet Midrash, you have to put it at the top of the agenda. It's very important to reject it because, in fact, the two cases are different. In our case of the buyer with the thief, the buyer relies on the thief and says, I have full trust in you, you're going to make it good. And in exchange for that benefit of satisfaction, that he gives him the benefit of the doubt, he buys it on behalf of the buyer, whereas the case of the heir and the fisherman, the buyer does not rely on the seller, and that's why in that case is different, and there's no sale. Hava obada bepumpedita veotbe amarlu Rav Yosef zo ena sricha lifnim. There was a case just like this in Pumpedita where a thief stole land from an owner and sold it to a buyer, and then the thief went and bought it legitimately, and they decided to reject Rav, right, based on Rav Sheshat. And they said the thief, that means he bought it for himself, it does not go to the buyer. And Rav Yosef told those sages, Rav Sheshat's rejection of Rav does not need to be brought to the Bet Midrash because it's correct. It's so correct, we don't even have to open that discussion anymore. So they sided against Rav. However, V'amar Abaye. Okay, good. Now Abaye joins in with Rava to defend Rav. Sricha lifnim v'lifnei lifnim. Hacha samcha da'ateh, hacha la samcha da'ateh. Abaye doubles down on Rava's answer. You have to bring this up and you have to put it at the top of the agenda. You have to put it in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the innermost, right, section of the Bet Midrash. This should be the main topic of discussion, because if you look carefully at it, you'll see that in our case of the buyer and the thief, the buyer relies on the thief and willingly says, yes, you buy it for me, and the thief, for that benefit, that he gets, he does buy it on behalf of the thief. Whereas the heir and the fisherman, in those cases, the seller does not rely, the buyer does not rely on their guarantee that they're going to catch fish or be an heir to something during that in the future. Now back to the Braita. How come in the Resha the sale is not valid, but in the Sefa where he says whatever I inherit today, or whatever I will catch today, then it is a valid sale. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Sefa, ma she'irash me'aba hayom mishum kibod aviv, ma she'talem misudati hayom mishum kedeh hayav. Because Sefa, what he says when he's talking about today, so when he says whatever I inherit today, that means he's expecting that his father is going to die that day, and he needs to cover the burial costs, and therefore, for the honor of his own father, it makes sense that he would say, "Listen, my father's about to die, and I can't afford the burial, so I want to sell to you now what I'm going to inherit. I need a cash advance so that I can go and pay for the funeral. By the time he dies, and then I get the inheritance, it'll be too late. I need to pay for these things now in order to prepare, and then I'll get the inheritance afterwards." And then I'll pay, and then that whatever comes will be yours. But you give me the money now because I need it now. That's legitimate. And the rabbi said, you know what? We'll recognize that sale. Similarly, the fisherman, if he's a poor fisherman and he doesn't have what to eat that day, he just needs the basic supplies, and he has to buy some bait. He has to buy some food for the day, and he doesn't have anything. So the rabbi say, you know what? For one day, it's okay. He can pre-sell that which he's going to catch later on because he needs the money now. So for that, the rabbis made a special takana and said it's permitted. But otherwise, the thing doesn't exist yet, and therefore you cannot sell something that does not yet exist. And that will be the subject of the next sugya. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Ha'omer lechavero sadeh shani lokeach lichshe'ekachena kenuya lecha me'achshav kana. So Rav Yudah said in the name of Rav, a buyer tells a friend that listen, I'm going to buy this land later on. When I buy it, it'll be yours from now. I want to pre-sell to you something that I don't own yet. Right? It's true, but I want you to pay me for it now, right? And then when I end up buying it, then retroactively it'll be yours from now. This might be a good way to leverage. Maybe he doesn't have so much money to buy a field, but he says, listen, I'll flip it to you. You give me $1 million now, I'll buy it, and then tomorrow or next week, and then when I buy it, retroactively, it'll be yours from now. Rav says that works. You can do such a thing. Amar Rava, mistabara milta de Rav besadeh setam. Ava besadeh zo lo. Mi yemad mizdaben la nihale. Rava says, I agree with Rav in a case where that buyer says to the third party, a field in general. Listen, I'm going to buy a field. Not sure which one. I'm going to work out a deal. I have some options. And whatever one I buy will be yours from now. Then that works, because surely he can buy something or other. There's always something for sale. However, if the buyer says, I'm going to buy this specific field, right? Field A. And when I buy it, it'll be yours from now. That does not work because he can't guarantee. Maybe the owner of that particular field is not going to want to sell. And so since he cannot guarantee to give it to him, so that third party is not going to have faith, trust that for sure it's going to be his, and therefore that does not work. But if it's a general, a field, some field, then the third party can be sure that, he'll find something, and retroactively the transaction will work. We ask about Rava. V'ha'elohim amar Rav afilu besadeh zo. Rav didn't say that. Look at Rav's words, right? Halokech hamel chavero sadeh shani lokeach. Right? A field. So Rav said this even regarding a particular field. Mikedi Rav keman amar halishmate kirebi meir damar adam makne davar shelo ba'ala olam. And in fact, we can be assured that not only do we remember Rav saying his statement even in a particular field, but it makes sense because Rav follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir in general says that one can transfer ownership even of something that does not yet exist in the world. Tanya, Haomer Lisha, Hitkadeshi li la'achar she'etgayer la'achar she'titgayri, la'achar she'tachrer la'achar she'tishtachreri, la'achar she'emut ba'alech, la'achar she'achlos lach yevamich. לאחר שתמות אחותך אינה מקודשת. רבי מאיר אומר מקודשת. Interesting baraita. A man goes to a woman and he gives her a ring. And he said, you be mikudeshet to me after I convert. The man is not Jewish, so he cannot marry while he's not Jewish, but he's thinking about converting. He's going through the process. So he wants to do Kiddushin from now, even though there's no possibility. And so as soon as I convert, then retroactively, I want you to be my wife. Or she's not Jewish. You can't do Kiddushin with a non-Jew. It doesn't work. But he's going to give it to her from now. So the moment that she converts, then the Kiddushin will immediately take effect. Or let's say he is an Eved Kanaani, or she's a Shifcha Kanaanit. A Jewish woman cannot marry an Eved Ivri, and a Jewish man cannot marry a Shifcha Kanaanit. But if he says, okay, when I get freed, here's the money now. When I get freed, then this money will be your Kiddushin. Or when you become free, when a non-Jewish slave goes free, they automatically become Jewish. So it's the same as a conversion case. Or a woman is married, so if a man tries to do Kiddushin with a married woman, it's not going to work. But if he said, listen, here's your Kiddushin from now, for when your husband dies, right? Then when your husband dies, as soon as that happens, then this money will be the Kesef Kiddushin, and you will immediately be my wife. Not so nice to do. Certainly not in front of the husband. Or if the husband died and she is a Yevama, because he has no children, and she has to marry the Yevama. So now she's hoping that she'll do Chalitza. She doesn't want to marry this guy, or he doesn't want to marry, he's going to do Chalitza, but didn't do Chalitza yet. She's not allowed to marry someone else until Chalitza is done. So some other guy comes along and says, here's Kiddush, here's your ring, be Mikudeshet to me, once the Yavam does Chalitza with you. Or, if a man is married to one sister, he's not allowed to marry the other sister while his wife is alive. But he can go while his wife is alive. Let's say he goes to his sister-in-law and says, here's a ring, be mikudeshet to me when my current wife dies, or even if they got divorced, he's not allowed to marry the other sister, all right, until she dies. So even they could be divorced, and he does this, which would be not as insulting, I guess, to the ex-wife. He says, as soon as she dies, then you be mikudeshet. In all these cases, this is davar shelo bala olam, right? There's no possibility of marriage currently because it wouldn't work or it's prohibited. So therefore, Tanakama says there's no kiddushin here. You cannot, if you can't do kiddushin now, then you can't acquire, right? This here in this case is acquiring the wife as a wife. Acquiring the woman as a wife through Kiddushin. If it cannot be done now, you cannot do it because it doesn't exist. The possibility of Kiddushin does not exist now. Rabbi Meir, however, says the Kiddushin takes effect. And in fact, when the person converts or the person dies or whatever the item is, the Kiddushin will take effect immediately through that original transaction. So you see that, according to the Rabbi Meir, you can make a transaction of something that doesn't yet come into the world, and that would be the same as our case of a person who's buying a field that he doesn't own yet. It's true, he doesn't own it yet, so it's not his to sell, but that's okay, right? And here's the closing argument. The woman, in this case, has the same law as the field that he doesn't yet own, he didn't yet buy, but since both parties agree, just like in the case of the woman has to agree, of course. Kiddushin doesn't work without her consent, and so even if she is not Jewish now, but she agrees, yes, I will marry you once I convert. So even though there's no possibility now, so when it happens, the Kiddushin kicks in. So to here, the buyer, that third party buyer, says, listen, I know that you don't have it now, but I trust that you'll get it. And therefore, since he agrees to it, he can acquire something from that point even though the seller doesn't have it yet because he didn't buy it himself, nevertheless, the Rav is following the opinion of Rabbi Meir that you can make an acquisition of something that does not yet exist in the world. The item exists, that woman exists, the field exists, but the possibility of doing a transaction does not yet exist in the world because the person doing the transaction does not yet have a right to do so. Nevertheless, you can do a transaction now for the future when he will have the right to do so. And last halacha for today, Amar Shmuel, Hamoseh shtar hakna'a bashuk yachaziro laba'alim. Di mishum dechatav lilvot velo lava, ha shi'bed nafsheh. Vi mishum pera'on la chayshinan lepera'on dim'ita de par'eh mikra hava kara le. Shmuel says, if someone finds a deed of transfer, this is a deed that creates a lien, and it creates a lien even independently of the loan, and a loan actually happening. Right? I want to give you a lien on my land, and it might be connected to a loan. Maybe you'll give me money after for whatever reason. So if one finds that in the street and you're not sure who lost it, was it the lien holder or the writer of it who actually owns the land? So the answer is you give it to the owner. The owner means the creditor, the one who owns the lien on the land of the so-called borrower or the debtor. Why? Because if they wrote it down, but in order to in anticipation of a loan, but didn't actually make the loan, well, that's okay. Unlike a regular loan document, where the loan document only creates a lien at the time when the money is given to the loan, this deed of transfer, shtar hakna'a, creates a lien no matter what, even if there never was a loan. So therefore, that doesn't matter. And if you think that maybe it was the money was paid was already paid, right? The creditor was holding on to this lien document until such time as the debtor would pay something, and maybe it was already paid. That we don't worry about that, because if in fact the debtor paid his debt, then the creditor is supposed to give the shtar hakna'a back to the debtor, and the debtor should tear it up, right? That's what you do, because this is like having an outstanding check out there, an outstanding IOU. So if you pay, then you want to rip up that IOU so it cannot be used ever again. So the fact that it's not torn up means it's more likely that the creditor lost it and we give it back to him. That's Shmuel's law. Amar Rav Nachman, Abba min safre dayana de Shmuel hava, v'havina kebar shita kebar sheba, ud charna dehavu machreze v'amre, hani shitre haknayata de mishtakechi b'shuka nehaderinhu lemaraihu. Rav Nachman says, my father was one of the scribes of the judges of Shemuel, and I was about 6 or 7 years old. Now, we're not going to accept a testimony of a 6 or 7 year old, but here, this is not, we're just validating the opinion of Shemuel, that what we know that Shemuel said. We're just validating that indeed Shemuel and his court acted precisely in this way, because he remembers, right, from his father's house that they would make an announcement, and if anyone finds such a deed of transfer in the marketplace, it should go back to the owner, meaning to the creditor, and that supports the law of Shemuel that was done in practice. Amar Rav Amram, Af anan tanena, kol maaseh betin harei ze yachzir, alma lo chashinan lepera'on. Rambam says, in fact, we have a Mishnah to support us. There's a Mishnah, comes up in a few dapim from now, that says any court document, meaning any deed, promissory note that was authenticated by the court, right, and it's active, and it's now you find it. So you should return it to the owner, meaning to the creditor. So you see that from here also we don't suspect that it was already repaid, because otherwise it would be torn up, and therefore we give it back to the original owner. Now, I'm not bring this as a proof, but we're going to go back and forth whether this is actually a good proof. Amar le Rabbi Zera, matnitin b'shitre haltata ve'adrachta de la b'nei Firaon ninhu. Rabbi Zera says this is not a good proof, because this Mishnah is not talking about a regular IOU or general documents of a lien, but rather this is a deed of a bill of foreclosure or authorization to seize property. Now this, you don't have to worry about repayment, because if someone, right now, they're judged by the court that they have to give money to someone for whatever reason, then they says, listen, you can foreclose on this house. So you can go look, and either the house is still with the original owner, well, then you foreclose on it. And if it's not there anymore, well, then it doesn't matter. So in such a case, that's why you can return it to the creditor who's going to be collecting the house, because if it was already taken, well, then he already has it. So you don't have to worry that it can be used again. And therefore, certainly it was written, it came from the court, it has a court seal on it, so then give it back to the creditor, because obviously the creditor deserves to get that house, so he must have lost it. And if he already took the house, well, then he already has the house, and so there's nothing to worry about it. But so you see, that's not a proof that for a regular promissory note or a lien document that you can give it back, because those can be repaid. Amar Rava. And Rava says, wait a second, even these documents of foreclosure and authorization to collect, these also are things that you have to suspect that they were repaid and might be used again. How so? Because and the Nehar De'ah sages say that if something, if a property is appraised by a court in order to be collected, and it is in fact foreclosed on and seized, the original owner of it, meaning the debtor, he has up to 12 months to get it back. Right? He can come up with the money in 12 months and then take it back. And Amemar says, I'm from Nehar De'ah, and actually it's not limited to 12 months. You can get it back forever. So what do we see here? Even if someone's land was foreclosed and taken away from him, it could be that he went and bought it back. Now, if that document is still around, maybe it wasn't torn up, so someone who finds that document can go give it to the creditor again, and he'll then be able to foreclose on the property a second time, which would not be fair because it was already foreclosed, and the debtor already then paid what was due and got the money back. So you see that this argument of Rabbi Zera is not correct. Just the fact that it cannot be repaid, actually it can be repaid and used again. So that's not why this Mishnah is not a good proof for Shemuel. Rather, it's for a different reason. Ela amar Rava, hatam hainu tamad amre ihu hu da'afsidav nafshe, de be'idana de par'e ibaye le lemikre'e lishtare, ina me lemichtav shetara achrina ilave. Rava can agree with Rabbi Zera that Mishnah is talking about documents of foreclosure. However, the reason why in documents of foreclosure you give it back to the creditor is because we say the debtor has caused himself a loss. He should have torn up the document as soon as his land was taken away, or certainly at the time that he bought it back. Or, if he can't find it or whatever, he should have written a new document when he goes and gets money and buys back his land from the creditor. He should have had a document of sale showing that he bought it back. And so since he did not acquire the proper proof and destroy the other document of foreclosure, one or the other, so he caused himself a loss. Therefore, if we find it, we give it back to the creditor. Now, why is it his responsibility to do all that? The Medina ar'a la ba'ya lemihadar. Mishum v'asita yashav hato b'nei Adonai hu da'amur Rabbanan tihadar hilkach meresha hu dekazabin iba'ele lemichtav shetar zibineh. Because from the letter of the law, the land, once the creditor takes the land, forecloses and possesses that land, the creditor is not legally obligated to give it back from the letter of the law. The rabbis come and say, listen, to go beyond the letter of the law and do what's right in Hashem's eyes. And this was his land all along, and he, for some reason, was not able to pay a debt or owed something, and then he lost his land. So poor guy, you know what? If he can come up with the money, let him get his land back. So we say get it back. But really, he has no right to it, and we're allowing it, so it's really a new sale, basically. Since it's a new sale, you should write a document of sale. Anytime you buy something important, certainly buying land, you're responsible to make sure that there's a bill of sale. Hold on to the deed of your land and of your house to prove that it's yours. The fact that it didn't do that was really negligent on that buyer's part, the debtor's part, and that's why in that case the Mishnah says we give it to the creditor. But that's not a proof for Shemuel, right? Because this logic does not apply to a case of a promissory note or a lien document. Are you going to apply the same thing to a loan document? And then you would say, well, if he paid it back, then he should have torn it up. It's not necessarily so. There are a couple of instances where it's not so easy to tear it up. For example, where the creditor says, "Oh, I forgot it at home, the promissory note. All right, thank you for the payment today. I'll take the payment. I'll bring it to you. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. I don't have it now." And then he forgets to bring it. So the borrower never gets a chance to get the promissory note back to rip it up. And that could happen. Or the creditor might be holding on to the loan document because he wants the debtor to also pay the fee of the scribe. He paid back the entire loan, but the small fee that you have to give to the scribe was not paid yet. So I'm going to keep this until then. So since these things happen, and there are legitimate excuses for the debtor not to have torn it up. So when we find a loan document or a lien document in the street, we cannot be sure that it should go to the creditor. Maybe the debtor lost it. And so just based on this Mishnah, there is a reason to say that there's a distinction between these two types of documents, and the Mishnah may be only talking about a document of repossession, not a regular loan document, and therefore we cannot bring a proof from this Mishnah for the law of Shemuel. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.